The wind moved low over the grass like it was whispering secrets it didn't want heard. Dust trailed behind a limping wagon as its cracked wheel bumped uneven across the rutted trail. The sun was dying slow in the west, its red edge bleeding. Out behind the distant buttes, a woman walked beside the wagon, her black shawl drawn tight, one hand steadying the reins, the other gently resting atop a small boy's shoulder. He was perhaps 10, and his boots were too big, likely borrowed or inherited. His name was Nathaniel. Hers was Clara Sutton, and the land they crossed had never heard those names before. Ahead, the cabin sat lonely at the edge of a broken fence line. The fields were quiet. A single chimney breathed faint smoke into the pale gold sky. From the porch, a man watched, unmoving, unreadable, as the strangers approached. He stood with his weight on one leg, arms crossed, a battered rifle leaning just behind him against the doorframe. Calder Rourke hadn't spoken to another soul in over a year, and he had no plans to start today. The wagon came to a full stop near the gate, the mule grunting tired through its bit. Clara looked up, brushing strands of wind-tangled hair from her face. Her voice was dry from dust and road. "We've traveled far," she said, quiet but steady. "The wheels broke. We won't stay long. Just one night, if you'll allow it." Calder didn't speak. His eyes were storm-colored, the kind that saw through lies and mercy the same way a fire sees through wood. The silence held too long, and the boy shifted behind his mother's skirts, looking nervously between them. Then Calder finally moved. A flick of his chin, not toward the cabin, but the barn. Clara nodded once. "Thank you," she said. He didn't answer. The barn was old, but well kept. Dusty bales stacked high, tools hung neat along one wall. The smell of horses and leather thick in the air. Clara laid her boy down on a folded wool blanket and wrapped her shawl around them both. Her hands were steady, practiced. She built a small fire near the far wall, keeping the smoke low, her back always angled toward the wide-open door, like she never quite stopped watching for something. Outside, the wind picked up again. The sun was gone now, and with it, the last of the warmth. Calder still stood on the porch. From the darkened cabin behind him, only the faint light of a fire glowed. He hadn't moved from his post. Inside the cabin, the fire cracked slow and quiet. Calder stood at the window, the rifle in his hand again. Not raised, just held, balanced across his forearm like an extension of himself. Through the glass, he could see the flicker of her fire in the barn, hear the distant hush of her voice as she soothed the boy. She had courage, he'd give her that. But courage didn't always mean safety. He knew too well what came out of desperation and grief. On the wall behind him hung an old braided shawl, untouched in years. It still smelled faintly of rain and rosemary. Beneath it, a rocking chair creaked softly, empty, swaying with the wind that slid in under the cracks in the frame. The house was quiet except for the fire and the old wood settling. He thought of locking the door. He thought of going out there and telling them to leave. But he did neither. Instead, Calder Rourke stood at his window long into the night, watching. A mother hold her son beside a fire in his barn. Watching the stillness they carried with them, the kind born of sorrow that didn't speak its name. He wasn't sure if he was guarding them, or guarding himself. The boy slept. The woman did not. Neither did Calder. But something did settle in the bones of the house that night. Not peace. Not yet. But the softest hint of something different than the usual silence. A pause. A breath. A crack in the wall he didn't remember building. The wind outside howled again, but the rocking chair had stopped creaking. The first light of dawn bled slowly across the fields, soft and blue, like a bruise blooming over the skin of the earth. Mist hovered low, curling along the barn's beams and the broken fence posts that pointed skyward like weary fingers. The fire in the hayloft had gone out sometime in the night, and frost clung to the wagon wheel, catching the pale light like glass. Clara was already outside. She knelt beside the damaged wheel, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, sleeves rolled to the elbows. Her hands moved with the quiet rhythm of someone who'd done hard things too many times to complain about them now. She braced the axle with a loose timber, inspecting the split in the rim. Her fingers bore the signs of a woman who'd never been allowed to stay soft. Dirt in the knuckles, scars in the lines. Steady, unsentimental strength. From the porch, Calder watched. He stepped down, boots thudding against the packed earth. In his hands, a chipped tin cup and a black kettle. He didn't speak, just set the coffee on a stump near where she worked and walked off, the steam curling upward like a peace offering without a signature. She glanced up, caught his eye, and gave a single, quiet nod. Not quite gratitude. Something quieter than that. Maybe recognition. The boy was at the fence, feeding the mule bits of dried corn and humming to himself. Clara sang something too, a lullaby, maybe, in a tongue Calder didn't know. It was soft, distant, not meant for any living ear but her own. The kind of song sung more out of memory than melody. The ranch didn't echo. It swallowed sound, wind, slid past the house and around the barn, but the only thing that moved was the rocking chair by the door, creaking ever so slightly in the morning breeze. It had always creaked, even when it was occupied, especially then. The shawl still hung behind it, untouched, still tied in a loose braid where gentle fingers once looped it on the last cold night she was ever warm. Clara's voice didn't stop when she saw the chair, but something in her expression tightened, just around the edges. She noticed the shadows here, the way they didn't stretch. They settled and stayed. The field stretched wide, but Calder worked close that day. He split wood near the barn instead of the grove. He mended fence post rails he could have ignored another week. Anything to stay within sight. Anything to keep his hands busy while his mind drifted, uninvited, back to that cold March morning 3 years ago. His wife, Mary Beth, had gone quiet mid-labor. The midwife had fled. Snow was still on the roof, and he'd buried them both before the sun melted the icicles from the eaves. He didn't speak her name anymore, but he'd carved it into the cross that leaned beneath the sycamore tree, where the wind still rustled through the weeds that grew around the stone pile. Her wedding dress remained there too, folded beneath the cairn, wrapped in the same ribbon he'd tied it with after the funeral. It was her wish. "If I don't make it," she'd said, "let the land take what the Lord couldn't hold." Clara didn't ask about the grave, though her eyes drifted toward the tree once, then away again. She seemed to understand the weight of silence, the way some stories lived in the things left unsaid, in shadows and shawls and rocking chairs that wouldn't stop moving, even after the person who sat in them had. When twilight came, Clara didn't return to the barn. Instead, she sat on the porch, wrapped in the same shawl, her hands curled around her knees. Calder stood in the doorway. The rifle, for once, wasn't in his hand. "Ever been to church?" she asked, her voice low and without judgment. He looked out toward the distant hills, then down at his boots. "Once," he said. She nodded like that was enough. They didn't speak again. Not that night. But something changed in the house. Something small. Inside, the rocking chair had gone still, and for the first time in 3 winters, Calder Rourke laid down in his bed and slept. The rifle stayed leaning in the corner. Dust gathered quietly on its barrel. By noon, the sky had turned the color of old bruises. Low clouds pressed down on the horizon, thick and restless, dragging the wind with them. It kicked up dust from the dry hills, spun it into the air until the light dimmed to a strange orange-brown. Dusk. The mule grew skittish. The chickens vanished into their coop. Even the barn door creaked like it knew better than to be open. Clara stood beneath the overhang of the barn roof, her shawl wrapped tight around Nathaniel. The boy's cheeks were flushed now, sweat pooling at his temples despite the chill in the air. Fever had come like the storm, fast, unwelcome, and without warning. Calder stepped off the porch. He didn't say anything, just tilted his head toward the cabin door and waited. No rifle in sight, just the silence of a man who wasn't offering pity, only a place away from wind. Clara hesitated, then nodded. Inside the cabin, the world felt small and too still. The hearth was already lit, the fire casting long shadows that reached up the log walls. Clara stepped in with care. She noticed everything. The cracked teacup on the mantel, dust thick in its curve. The rifle mounted above the fireplace, wood worn from hands long gone. And beside it, a piece of braided rope. Faded, untouched, still knotted the way a woman might have left it. Calder cleared his throat and stoked the fire, kneeling close. She laid Nathaniel down near the hearth, unwrapping the shawl and pressing her wrist to his head. Too hot. She soaked a cloth from the basin and pressed it to his neck, her fingers moving with urgency, not panic. This wasn't her first fever. She just hoped it wouldn't be her last. The wind howled outside, scraping against the window panes like claws. The whole cabin trembled once, just slightly, as if the earth itself flinched. Calder poured coffee into a tin cup and held it, the steam twisting upward, vanishing into the air between them. His hands trembled, barely, but enough for her to see. He didn't drink. He just stared into the fire as if something inside it remembered him. She broke the silence first. "My husband died in Kansas," she said, voice quiet but steady. "Bar fight. Not his fault. But he was the one who bled out on the sawdust." Calder didn't speak, but he didn't look away. He was defending a drunk who never even thanked him. "The papers called it a misunderstanding. That was all. I got a telegram and a box of his things. The man who killed him walked free." Nathaniel stirred, and she hushed him with her touch. "We lost everything. The bank took the land. My brother took what little was left. Said it was safer with him. He kept the silver. Sold my mother's piano. I left with a wagon and a boy and a name no one wanted to hear." She looked up at Calder. "I don't belong anywhere," she whispered. "Not even to myself." The fire cracked. The wind screamed against the roof and rattled the loose panes. Calder stood and turned away for a moment, as if thinking. Then he walked to the kitchen corner and returned with another cup. He filled it, set it in front of her. "You belong here tonight," he said. Just that. No more. Clara blinked. Her eyes welled, but she looked away before a tear could fall. She took the cup, held it with both hands. Nathaniel whimpered once, then went quiet. Again, the fever rolling through him in waves. She wrapped the shawl tighter over his chest and leaned back against the wall. Outside, the storm began to pass. The wind quieted. The walls stopped shaking. And for the first time in days, the earth smelled not of dust, but rain. The kind that settled slow, soft, like something washing clean what the storm had left behind. Calder stood at the window now, arms crossed, watching the water trickle down the glass. Clara sipped her coffee. It was bitter, too strong, but warm, and in that moment, the silence between them didn't feel like distance. It felt like something shared. The storm left more than wet earth behind. It had torn branches from trees and blown the trail half into the creek. The wagon sat where it had been, well splintered, axle slumped, hopeless for now. Calder said nothing about it. Neither did Clara, so they stayed. The days grew longer, not by the sun, but by the weight of unsaid things inside the cabin walls. Silence stretched like stretched leather, thin in places, but tense as ever. It wasn't cruel, but it wasn't comfortable either. It was the kind of quiet that meant everything was felt and nothing was spoken. Clara took to the garden, plucking the weeds that had grown thick in Calder's years of disuse. She repaired a cracked window pane with waxed cloth, wrapping it tight with twine so the wind wouldn't whistle through the corners. Her hands moved like they had in her old life, like they belonged somewhere. Nathaniel didn't speak much either, but his hands were never still. He followed Calder to the barn, watched how he fed the mule, how he sharpened the blade before chopping wood. The boy sat in the dirt near the porch and dragged a stick through the soil, drawing and redrawing the shape of Calder's old cattle. Brand. A crooked R stamped into a broken horseshoe. He didn't ask what it meant. He just copied it, Calder noticed. The next morning, he showed the boy how to grip a hatchet. Just once. No lesson. No speech. He set a log upright and let the boy try it. Nathaniel missed the first swing. Calder didn't correct him, just waited. Later, they saddled the mule together. Clara watched from the doorway, her arms crossed in the sunlight. That evening, she braided her hair. Not tight like a widow might, but loose, the way she used to, back when someone waited at the door. The sun caught the strands as they moved down her back. When Calder passed by, his jaw clenched, but he didn't stop walking till he found her that night outside the cabin, sitting on the step. The moon was out, pale and cold. He was oiling an old tool, a wrench he hadn't used since his last fence. Post rusted into the dirt. His sleeves were rolled, forearms smudged with grease. Her eyes traced the scar along his knuckle, the one that looked like it had never healed right. "I wanted to say thank you," she said softly till he looked up, eyes unreadable. "Don't," he said. Just that. And went back to work. Later, the fire burned low inside the cabin. Clara padded across the floor in bare feet, her shawl wrapped close around her shoulders. The boards creaked under her step. The wind had stilled outside, but the air inside the house was too thick to breathe right. She passed by his room. The door was ajar. She didn't mean to look, but she did. There, beneath the wooden bed frame, sat a small wooden box, and folded beside it, a dress. Pale ivory, frayed at the collar, still creased like it had never been touched since the day it was placed there. Mary Beth's wedding dress. Clara didn't gasp, didn't cry, just closed her eyes for a moment and backed away. Calder stood in the hallway when she turned. Neither of them spoke. She passed him without a word and returned to the corner where she slept. Pulling the shawl tighter, in the morning, she was gone. Not from the ranch, but from the house. Calder walked outside to find only cold ashes in the hearth. The blanket she'd used was folded neatly at the edge of the floor. He checked the barn and found her there, tending to Nathaniel beside the hayloft again, her back to him. She didn't look up. He didn't call her name. The wall between them, the one that had softened, now stood firm again, not angry, not hurt, just cold and high. The sun had long passed its highest point when Clara realized Nathaniel was gone. She called his name once, then again louder. Her voice broke on the third cry. The jackrabbit, she'd seen it dart across the fence an hour before, tail flicking, white like smoke. Nathaniel had laughed and followed it with a stick in hand. She hadn't thought twice. Children chase things. But now, only silence answered her. Calder was near the creek, clearing a felled branch. When she ran toward him, breath sharp in her chest, her face told him everything that he didn't speak. Just dropped the saw, mounted his horse bareback, and was gone before her tears had dried on her cheeks. The woods weren't thick, but the light there turned dim, even at noon. Calder dismounted near the cottonwoods and crouched low. Small boot prints. One set. Scuffed, uncertain. He followed them through the brush, careful not to disturb the pattern. Then he heard it, a soft, shaking sound, like breath hitched between sobs. Beneath an old cedar tree, hunched beside a hollowed stump, sat Nathaniel. His knees pulled to his chest. Tears marked trails down his dirt-smeared face. He wasn't crying anymore. Just frozen. Calder didn't speak. Didn't scold. He knelt, arms wide but slow, like approaching a spooked foal. Nathaniel blinked up at him, then collapsed forward into his chest. Calder lifted him, not roughly, not hurried, just firm, careful, like a man who remembered what it was to carry something that could break. The ride home was quiet. When they arrived, Clara met them on the trail, her breath catching at the sight. She didn't run, just opened her arms. Nathaniel reached for her, and Calder let go. Inside, the fire crackled. Not for warmth. The storm had passed days ago, but for something steadier, something human. Calder brought in wood. His hands were scraped. A sliver of pine stuck in his palm. He didn't bother with it. Just dropped the logs near the hearth. Clara sat in the rocking chair, her son curled on the bed, asleep again. This time from exhaustion, not fever. Her eyes followed Calder as he moved. "You're kind," she said quietly. He snorted, but not in mockery. "You're strong," he said back, not meeting her eyes. "Stronger than any man I've known." The fire hissed. Outside, a wind tugged at the eaves, the kind that didn't bite, just reminded you the night was alive. She rocked slowly. The sound filled the space between them. That, and the ticking of something neither of them had built, but both felt. By the door, her shawl now hung beside the other. They touched, just at the fringe. Clara looked at them, then at him. "You can't keep living with ghosts," she said softly. He didn't move. His boots remained rooted near the hearth, his hands still dirty, his chest still rising like he wasn't sure what breath meant anymore. "I didn't know how to stop," he admitted. Silence. Then she whispered, "Let the dead rest. I need a man who can still live." He turned and nodded, just once, but it was enough. The firelight flickered over their faces, and the space between them didn't feel empty anymore. The frost had left the trail. The sky had begun to turn soft again, no longer gray, but that color of morning dust that came before bloom. Calder had risen early, before the rooster, before even the mule stirred. The wagon stood whole now, its wheel repaired with thick lashings and a spare rim Calder had found buried behind the shed. He'd oiled the axle himself, silent in his work, as if each movement meant something more than it showed. Clara folded the last of her things into a canvas satchel. Nathaniel wrapped the rope halter around the mare's neck like he'd been taught. His hair stuck in tufts, eyes sleepy but clear. When Calder approached with the final bundle of supplies, Nathaniel stepped forward without warning and wrapped both arms around his waist. "Thank you, sir," the boy said. "Not Mr. Not Sir Calder. Just Sir." Like a soldier to a man he trusted with his back. Calder's hand found the boy's shoulder, squeezed once. Inside the cabin, near the hearth, Clara left something behind, a small drawing on brown paper. 3 stick figures, one tall, one with a braid, and one small between them. A crooked cabin with smoke curling from the roof. A sun peeking from the corner. She didn't say anything about it. Later, she stood in the doorway, holding the reins. The wind tugged gently at her skirt. "We can leave," she said. "But you'd still be here. Alone." Calder didn't answer. Not yet. He walked to the sycamore tree, its limbs casting shadows across the yellowing grass. The grave was there, under the cairn, the stones worn smooth by seasons. He knelt, set the cedar box beside the marker, opened it slowly. Inside lay the dress, pale as ash, pressed flat but never forgotten. He placed it inside, then dug deeper into the earth, burying it beneath fresh soil. His fingers moved slow, reverent. "Goodbye, Mary Beth," he whispered. "Thank you for waiting." When he stood, the sun was low. The light caught the edge of the dress's ribbon as it vanished beneath the earth. Back at the porch, Clara and Nathaniel were already in the wagon. The mare stamped, restless. Dust stirred beneath her hooves. Clara turned the reins in her hands, ready to flick them once. Calder walked up beside the wheel. "Stay," he said. She looked at him, not startled, just still. "Not just for the night," he added. The smile came slow, like sunrise, like thaw. She stepped down. By the fire that evening, the rocking chair creaked, but not from solitude. 2 cups steamed on the table. One hand passed a ladle. One hand took it. The shawl by the door was no longer braided with grief. It belonged to the woman who now laughed softly when her son said something about teaching the mule to read. And, out in the dusk, no ghosts moved among the wind. Only the quiet sounds of a second chance taking root, like seeds in tilled earth, long waiting to bloom.